Hello and welcome back to a new YouTube video. Today doing 25.16 support to this server draw content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes towards the support role this patch. Most notably, we saw buffs towards some of the AP options in the support role, that being the likes of Zyra, Brand, and Morgana. We saw nerfs towards the likes of Rel and Lulu, who'd been performing quite well for a while, and then we saw a nerf towards Yumi. I'm surprised that she went quite as hard as they did on the champion. She isn't that performant in higher MMR brackets at the moment, and is passable in low MMR brackets. I basically don't recommend the champion at all anymore, as the nerfs were really hefty towards her late game, which was kind of the reason why you were picking the champion, because of like the power she could provide later on into the game. That being said, let's get into the tier list. So the D tier is going to consist of the exact same champions. We lead off with MF. She's been in a pretty bad spot for a while now. The AP build is too costly and doesn't provide enough to kind of make her valuable here as an option. Twitch, even with the kind of surge of AP mid and AP bot Twitch, AP support Twitch still underperforms quite heavily, even when you opt into the correct rune set. Obviously, Halo Blades performs quite a bit worse than PTA, but he's still just not that good of an option, so I am going to have him remaining in the D tier. The two gimmick picks here are the likes of Malphite and Veigar. Veigar obviously paired with Ziggs, Malphite paired with Yasuo. They don't perform particularly well even in their pairings, and outside of their pairings they're basically not played, so not picks I would particularly recommend. And then Zyra wraps up, not Zyra, Ashe wraps up the D tier. This pick, obviously, in more recent times has been more viable than some of the other options here, but she's been adjusted a lot, and right now her current builds just aren't that supported. You can still argue that there are spots where you really want to lane bully, and if you are very comfortable with champion and you know to get like values out of the ults into like the mid and late game, where you might be able to like bump her up a tier or two, but for the average player I'm just going to completely recommend avoiding her. The C tier event, so we lead off with a Mumu, still lacking a solid like item set really in support. The overall kit isn't bad, like the double Q combined with the lockdown on the ultimate and just the baseline value is all quite nice at the moment, but just limited by the fact that his itemization is bad. Renata sits in the C tier. It's unfortunate to see the kind of state Renata has fallen in at this point. She's not that performant of a champion in solo queue, either demanding too much out of the player, just not having the greatest like item choices, albeit like Redemption's in a very strong spot at the moment. She's one of those champions which can opt into it. I think Riot will probably notice that she's like the second least popular support in the game at the moment for like a newer released champion. It's just not that great of a state for her to be in, so I would like to see some changes soon, but right now, just a pick I would kind of recommend avoiding. Silas sits within the C tier. I think you could argue in some counterpick scenarios, you can get value out of this champion, and combined with the fact that he's like a four-way flex option, there's more value there. He's not that performant as a support though, kind of predicated on snowballing early advantages. Mel actually still holds a relatively large support player base. It's honestly surprising. The pick has, like, I think 33% of her games played as a support. I think if you Emax, obviously there's still a decent like group of players which will max Q, and that does heavily underperform on the champion. I think if you Emax, you could honestly maybe even bump her up to the B tier. She's still not that performant, and with other AP options being buffed this patch, she does also just sink a bit further down off that. So yeah, it kind of still sits in the C tier. Not a pick I really recommend at the moment. And then Yumi, I'm actually going to put Yumi at the end of the C tier. She's more viable than the D tier options, I can tell you that much, and I think in the right pairing, she can still be played, but the scaling nerf does really hurt one of the core aspects of why you are kind of picking Yumi, because you are like sacrificing agency on the map. You're sacrificing some level of power early on to the game, and now that you're not gaining as much out of that, it just makes the pick really, really hard to recommend, and unless you're like, I don't know, very comfortable on it, or you pick it in only very specific pairings. The B tier then, so we lead off with Tom Kent. She's been in a pretty bad spot for a while now, but he's relatively simplistic, and you can usually just get value out of him having as like a champion which has a bit more agency for a support, doing a bit more damage, and just having some like isolated strength in this one. Annie I've removed because she just isn't really played again. There was a slight spike when she got power put into her base kit, but now that people have kind of just moved away, I'm going to remove her. Teemo I have in the B tier. Genuinely not a terrible support option. I think in the right spots this pick can actually be valuable. That being said, most people will think you're trolling when you're picking Teemo support, and that probably is enough to just be like, Not really recommending this champion. It's unfortunate because like I think there are genuine Teemo support spots where you can get like a huge amount of value out of the blind and then get value out of the shrooms in the mid to late game. Like that control can be quite powerful. Galio sits within the B tier, and honestly, I'm just going to pair Galio and Zac with each other again. These two picks just lack particularly good items when they played support. They can go lock it, but they don't feel amazing going this item. So yeah, kind of lack within that area. But their baseline kits are valuable, and in the right spots, I still think they can sit as like solid B tier options. Shen also kind of in this region, he goes heart still, I believe, when played support, which just makes him quite selfish, but can be quite nice into like support AD pairings, which are reliant on either auto attacking or like into the Leona, for example. That's usually just the common example of where you're playing with Shen. You can go lock it, obviously, if you want, and you want to be a bit more util heavy, but when you're picking Shen, you probably want some level of agency. Like, I always recommend some level of agency when playing solo queue. Even in support, I think it can be quite a powerful thing to have. Hui, I think, is a fine option. Not one of the premier AP mages in the support role, but definitely there if you're very comfortable on him. Obviously, if you don't have the mastery, then he just sits as like a C, maybe even D tier pick, just a kind of like an avoid option. But this is for like those players who have some level of mastery on him. I just want to pick him every so often in the spots where they feel comfortable playing him. Senna still remains in the beta. She's getting a hefty buff next patch, so definitely a pick to watch. I'm going to leave her here for the moment, though. Her enchanter build is fine, and her AD build is also kind of they're both kind of mediocre, like fine builds. She's very squishy, vulnerable to a lot of the things played in the meta, so I'd only recommend using her as a counterpick. But I think in counterpick scenarios, she can still be a fine option at the moment. Pyke is a good option, but he's just very hard to pilot. He's like one of the top 3 hardest to pilot supports in my opinion. Oftentimes relying quite egregiously on snowballing, needing to really take over the game and then close like before the kind of like 25-minute mark, before other champions kind of just like catch up to him, and he becomes like really he's fragile, and he can sometimes just struggle like with the armor and the like durability of champions later on into the game. Blitzcrank, I'm going to leave in the B tier. He is better these days. Obviously, I actually had him in the C tier for a while, but buffs were a while ago at this point, but just as like a baseline kit, the hook can result in like games being won, and that can be a very powerful thing to have. That being said, though, I think there are compositions where Blitz can really struggle into matchups in the bot lane where even if you hook the target, it's not particularly winning. It can definitely struggle, so I do have him in the B tier at the moment. If he got buff, though, I could definitely see him jumping higher up. Seraphine is like a mid to low B tier option. She's kind of this jack of all trade support option, which is only really played with Ashe. Like, I think Seraphine Ashe is kind of the main spot you're looking for when you're playing Seraphine. Outside of that, she probably sits as more like a low B, maybe even C tier option. She's not in the greatest of states. I think she could probably get buffed and be fine. But obviously, bot lane Seraphine's always a bit scary. Albeit, bot lane Seraphine isn't in also one of her greatest states. So maybe there's room there at some point. So yeah, I'm going to leave her in the mid to low end of the B tier. Morgana, I'm leaving her in the B tier. She's getting buffed again in 25.17. The buffs the buffs ended up being relatively net neutral in power, but feel better because it was kind of like a quality of life / like buff kind of thing they were doing for her, but didn't end up giving her enough power. So yeah, the power that she gets next patch will be meaningful. She'll get bumped up to the A tier, so probably a pick which I'd recommend watching. I think the issue of Morgana support's always going to be her consistency and the fact that her kit really doesn't feel that aligned with like the tools she can provide. So she's a weird champion, but can be also quite frustrating. Eats a lot of ban rate when she's quite strong. Even when she's not strong, she still eats a decent chunk of ban rate, having the 3-second snare on the Q. Swain sits within the beta. He's been in a decent spot for support for a while now. Maybe slightly under the bar. I think he's a bit more reliant on counter pick scenarios where you aren't just going to get bursted down, or enemy support isn't going to really heavily punish you. You don't really want to be playing Swain into an enchanter lane, for example. That can definitely be quite punishing. But I'd say he kind of sits as a solid B tier option at the moment. Fiddle is another AP. Actually, Fiddle support isn't really Fiddle support's more of a trailblazer, pseudo tank option. providing just a lot of CC. He's also fine. Obviously lost a lot of his pick rate ever since like the nerfs that he received back along. But he can still work. Like the ultimate's still a very powerful ability, and just the baseline value of his kit is still very high. So I do still have him in the like high end of the B tier. Lux, I think is was obviously a very popular support. I think she's been fine to kind of just mediocre for a while now. Her burst and like snowball potential very high, and if you get like the ball rolling, she's a very valuable champion. But if you struggle to get the ball rolling, you like struggle to kind of consistently get takedowns, then she really loses a lot of value, and I kind of just recommend avoiding the pick at that point. Like in the right pairings, obviously the right pairings traditionally ends up being like the Caitlyn lane, and I don't recommend Caitlyn at the moment. I think Caitlyn looks traditionally is just a very bait thing to lean into, like even up until like GM, for example. Lots of bot laners can really struggle with the kind of pressure that lane puts on them, but Lux, I kind of recommend it as like a mid B tier option at the moment. Some of the high B tier though, like your Zerefs, I actually quite like, and the buff towards Horizon Focus. If it ends up being his like second best item, we'll probably bump him back up to the A tier. Right now he's kind of leaning on like a Shadow Flame second, so he lost power compared to where he was pre the Horizon Focus nerf, but definitely still seeing as like a high B tier option. I think as like an artillery pick, he can be quite valuable. I do have, it's like the inverse of mid, where I have Vel'Koz as like my higher rated support, and Zeref as my lower rate, and Zeref as like my lower rated support, and then mid it's like I rate Zeref higher than Vel, because I think Vel's baseline kit is a bit better, but Zeref, if you give him a bit more gold, can be, and XP can be a bit more valuable in that aspect. Anyway, I digress. Zoe, I think, is an incredibly good support if you pilot it well, and honestly could probably be bumped up to the A. She's just a bit challenging to pilot, but it's kind of like the dissuading factor here. But I still have her at the high end of the B tier. If you're very comfortable playing Zoe, I will continue to like recommend her as an option. If you're not very comfortable, she's not necessary to play at the moment, but she can definitely be a good option to have within your pool. Kind of similar to Elise and LeBlanc though, and I kind of rate those champions a bit higher at the moment, so I'd still probably recommend Elise and LeBlanc as like the pool options, but Zoe can be a fine pick there. Nico definitely lost a bit of power when they nerfed her more recently, especially in support, because they were kind of early game skewed nerfs. She's still very challenging to play. Like the W is a very, very high reward ability, and if you can get the value out of it, I think she can sit in the A, maybe even close to like S tier options. But if you I mean the demand is just so high that I have her in the B tier at the moment. But our laning like bullying lane phase like bullying capability is still really high, and can still be really rewarding if you're able to like convert out of that. Moving on to the A tier then, so we're going to lead off with Brand. He's doing a lot better this patch. The buff to his CC duration on Q combined with the buff with his ultimate, really nice for support. Brand gives him a bit more CC, gives him a bit more like damage uptime with the ultimate, allows him to fight objectives a bit more frequently, and that's a good change for him. I think it makes him a bit more relevant. Brand's been kind of under the bar for a while, and I'd say he's over the bar, so I have him in the A tier. Other picks within the A tier include the likes of Alistar. He got nerfed more recently. The nerf did make him a bit weaker, but he's still a really like powerful option. His ultimate's a very strong ability. He's a great engaged pick, and if you can utilize the full extent of his kit, I still think he is one of the best support options in the game. Maokai is just a very easy to play champion. I don't think he's in the greatest of states, but he's like the ease of access combined with the fact that you can just point and click CC, knock someone into your team, or just like play the vision game with your or play the ultimate game with your ult. It gives him like different tools to work with, and I think all of them can be quite valuable, which is why I still rate him above the bar at the moment. Pantheon I rate above the bar because he's a good AD option. I think he's just a bit more accessible than Pyke, which is why I rate him higher than Pyke, albeit I think Pyke is still a better support pick generalistically. Pantheon is just easier to play, point and click CC, and then you kind of go from there. So yeah, I rate him in the A tier. Rakan, it's been decent for a while now, ever since they buffed him more recently. Well, I say more recently, it's been a while since his buffs, but he's kind of just been above the bar for a support option. If you're looking for like more mainstream picks, then yeah, Alistar and Rakan are like great picks there for you. Zyra sits within the... no, actually, I'm going to move Zyra. Shaco, I'm going to leave within the A tier. He got nerfed this patch. It was a nerf to his AD builds. And some people do play AD Shaco support, so that will affect them. But AP Shaco support, still a very solid option, so I am going to like leave him in the A tier, like as like a remaining A tier pick. I'll honestly, like, I think Brand and Shaker are, like, rate a bit higher at the moment still. Elise, LeBlanc, and, like, Velcros, honestly, like, all fit in this vein of, like, AP champions, and like, actually, Brand just joins them now at this point. In the case of LeBlanc, she doesn't have the kind of difficulty point of CSing and being able to kind of just focus on executing your combo, getting your damage down. I actually think it's just better for like mid to low elo. Like that makes the champion, like the barrier to entry on the champion, a bit lower. You still need to pilot it correctly though. Like if you pilot it badly, then I just recommend looking towards other picks. The case of Elise, she's still a very strong support option with great dive potential, great lockdown on the cocoon, combined with the like base damage of this champion and the snowball potential of the champion. I still rate her quite highly. I still think she can be a very solid pick. Vel'Koz, obviously one of the more traditional like artillery options, AP options within the support role. I still think he's a very powerful champion, especially if you just understand how to like effectively like proc for passive and get his damage down. I think that's kind of just the main kind of thing with the champion. He can also be punished into certain lanes which have the tools to like either dive on him or like survive his just upfront damage. And yeah, those are like some of the EP picks I have here. Okay, Fresh. So Fresh is an interesting one. Fresh might actually be a borderline S tier champion at the moment. I think people have begun to caught on to the fact that he's actually a pretty good option. I do think that comes with like a slight caveat, where Fresh is a very demanding champion. If you pilot Fresh badly, he looks useless, and that can definitely be a big turn off or a big big point of like frustration with the champion. So I'd recommend putting time into him if you haven't already, and like really learning the kit and what spots you want to play him in. You can OTP him, although I'd recommend not OTPing him because I do think he can be punished in certain spots. But he's definitely in a good spot at the moment. So honestly, I recommend him as an option. I have him towards the high end of the A tier. Zilean, still a very solid option. The kind of utility aspect of this pick, if you pair him with like champions which really benefit from movement speed, it's really high, and his like the two builds he has is obviously like the more supportive and chantry AP style build, and the more tanky style build where you're playing like your Locket and your like Kindle gem maxing. I think both goes can be viable in the right spots. Braum, still have him in the A tier. He's a bit lower down in the A tier at the moment. I have him with like the other more mainstream support picks here. He's definitely suffered from his nerfs. He's a lot squishier, and with that comes his reliability. He's still good into engaged supports though, but there are a lot of like S tier enchanters and just popular enchanters at the moment which do like functionally counter him. So I'd recommend maybe not. I recommend using him as a counter pick. I just don't recommend blinding him. He definitely suffers a lot more as a champion now. Poppy and Tarak, I still think are incredible options. I really do value these picks quite highly. Poppy did receive a string of nerfs towards the beginning of the year, but she's kind of stayed steady. Tarak obviously is just a very unpopular champion that plays to his strengths. I've seen Tarak's beat a lot of things which maybe you in theory wouldn't expect them to, and that just comes with time in the champion. Like a Tarak OTP can be quite valuable. If you're not someone who's put a decent chunk of time on Tarak, he's probably just a non-factor, so I'd actually have him as more like a mid A tier option. Like I'd recommend some of the other things over him at the moment. So the enchanters included the likes of Milio and Soraka. I think Milio pairs really nicely with some of the ADCs at the moment, and Soraka is just generally a really nice enchanter to have in your team. You can usually get good value out of the kit. Nautilus, I actually still have towards the top of the A tier with the additional flex value the pick has this patch. Still, for me, it doesn't really change anything. Like I actually don't think that really matters that much for support Nautilus because you'd usually just end up blinding him anyway. So yeah, sits within the A tier still. He's one of my premier like engage options. Rel, I'm actually dropping to like the other bunch of engaged supports here. She's also suffered from her nerfs this patch. Like they were meaningful, so she is going to be lower down on the tier list now. I still think if you're very comfortable in Rel, you can still pick her in the same spots, and you can still usually get good value out of the pick. She's just less durable than she was before. What other things are we moving around then? So Bard, I'm gonna need. Okay, so I'll leave Bard in the top of the A tier. It's really, I really want to push Bard into the S tier, but he does have a barrier to entry, and if you pilot Bard badly, this pick looks bad. Like you don't want to be the person who ults and completely solo loses the game. That being said though, he's in a really good state at the moment, and I would really recommend learning him if you haven't already. He does have really, really high highs, and he's probably number one if you are just like looking for an elite skewed kind of higher agency support at the moment. Lulu, I'm dropping down to like the low end of the A tier as well. She suffered from her nervous patch, 2 seconds on E, really was meaningful. I believe she also lost some damage on E, if I remember correctly, and yeah, that's her core ability. Losing power in that going to be genuinely impactful to the kit, and yeah, I would not recommend picking her as much, albeit you can still play her in spots where like the enchanter option would have been good. I just recommend looking towards some of the other options now. Karma, actually no, I'll talk about Nidalee first. Nidalee I'm going to bump up to the A tier. Nidalee support is probably overpowered, like actually genuinely overpowered. But the problem with Nidalee support is you need to pilot the champion well, and Nidalee obviously is like historically hard to play. That being said though, I think you can play it under the bar. You don't need to be like Canyon level Nidalee and still get good value out of the champion. But he is a very powerful ability, 7-second steroid, 80% attack speed. It's very, very strong. One of the strongest in the game. If not just outright the strongest steroid in the game. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, but that being said though, you need to like kind of abuse the power this pick has like in lane and kind of bully people out. And I think if you do, then yeah, she's an incredible option. Like I'm actually genuinely kind of promoting her as a pick. But don't troll people. Don't fast time it. You do need to put time into the champion. Otherwise, you'll just not be valuable enough to really merit it. But if you understand how to pilot the pick, yeah, I think she's an incredible champion at the moment. Leona, I'm going to bump up to the S tier. She's kind of replaced Rel in the S tier realm now. Really good, consistent knockdown. Like the ultimate, the point and click CC, but just baseline durability of the champion, all very meritable as a like kind of like kit at the moment. So yeah, I'm going to bump her up to the S tier as yeah, this replacement for Rel. With Lulu also coming down, I'm going to bring 2 other champions up. Karma's been like top of A tier for a while now. This is the Enchanter variant of Karma, where you get like 3 points Q E max and kind of just play with this Enchanter build where you still have good laning phase bullying, but you scale a lot better, and that was always kind of the limitation of Karma. Her scaling was really bad, but this Enchanter build gives her like that, and that is very strong for her. So yeah, in the S tier she goes. And then Zara got buffed this patch. The buffs were really meaningful. She gains 1 second, I believe, on her snare, so that goes from 13 to 12. And the ult change was just damage. Doesn't really matter as much, but like yeah, the snare change is the meaningful one. Being able to provide more CC to your team is meaningful. And yeah, she was top of A tier, so now I just bump her up to the S tier. The other 3 picks remaining in the S tier are Nami, because she's just so flexible as like an enchanter option. She can pair with most things and usually be valuable, has a low barrier to entry, and it just makes her very recommendable as an enchanter option in the support role. Janna is a bit harder to pilot, more reliant on being a counter pick as well, but she has also got one of the strongest stories in the game on the E, and her like peeling tools are so valuable that I do still recommend her as an S tier option, but probably the lowest of the S tier picks. Like I would recommend the other ones over her first. And then Sona, I'm like a known Sona hater. Like, this is the worst thing. Like I really despise where this champion is played in so many different ways. But the pick is so good. I think the champion in the right spots is like one of the best in the game, if not just outright the best support in the game. That being said though, if you blinded in a bad spot and it becomes like the lane is unplayable, you are basically sacking the game for bot lane, and that I think is really meaningful. And I think if you do that, then the champion becomes a lot less valuable. Play her as a counter pick in the right spots, and she's incredible. Like I really, really do recommend Sona as an option within your pool. I think she's my number 1 recommendation enchanter. If you want something a bit more general, then I'd say Karma's probably the number. I mean, Karma and Nami are like number 1, 2. Like they both kind of like flex around. Karma I think has a bit more agency, but Nami just generic has like a really valuable kit. And then my engage recommendation options are probably just like Leona, Nautilus. Bard is a higher agency champion. Same goes for Zyra. I think both these picks can be really good at the moment, but you want to have had some time in them. Overall, I think there's a bit of flexibility in what you can play in the support role in the current state. It's just some of the more mainstream ones have kind of been nerfed because of their power in competitive at the moment. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.